You're listening to the Bar Business Podcast, where every week your host, Chris Schneider, brings you information, strategies, and news on the bar industry, giving you the competitive edge you need to start working on your bar rather than in your bar.
In last week's episode, we talked about why KPIs matter, KPIs being key performance indicators. And we said they matter because this allows you to unlock success through data-driven decision-making. But what we didn't discuss last week is, what does data-driven decision-making actually look like? How do we actually go about turning these KPIs, turning these data points into data-driven decision-making? So this week, we're going to talk about continuous improvement through visual management, which is how we do that data-driven decision-making. So if you have not had a chance to listen to last week's episode on why KPIs matter, I would highly suggest that you go listen to that episode, since that lays the groundwork for everything we are going to discuss today. So to lay this all out, the key performance indicators are what we measure for the purpose of making data-driven decisions. We're going to use visual management that will show us the data and allow us to quickly analyze it. And then we're going to use a process of continuous improvement through problem solving and root cause analysis that will allow us to make those data-driven decisions and to implement them through a rigorous and scientific process. Now, I'm sure there are some of you out there that have just heard me say all this and have thought, well, that sounds a heck of a lot like lean management. And it is. It's essentially an adaptation of lean management for the bar business. For those of you unfamiliar with lean management, let me back up here a little bit and give you a little bit of background. Lean management essentially came from manufacturing and Toyota. It goes back to the 50s, and it really was about how can we go from batch producing things to doing one-piece flow in manufacturing. Now, obviously, that has very little to do with hospitality. But the general concepts of management through numbers and visual aids really does work for us in hospitality. And it really does work for the bar business. And it's not hard to understand. So don't think that what we're about to discuss is some weird way to turn making a car into the same as making a drink. It's not. Because quite frankly, making a car and making a drink are totally separate processes. And what goes on in hospitality, what goes on in bars is far different from what goes on in manufacturing. But we can take the essence of what Toyota did, the essence of what took Toyota from being a tiny manufacturer to the largest car maker in the world, and apply that to hospitality in a way that really allows us to optimize what our bars do and to drive additional revenue. So first thing I want to do as we go down this path of talking about continuous improvement through visual management is to return to the KPIs we discussed last week and just briefly run through those with you again to refresh your mind on the 15 KPIs that we discussed tracking. So we discussed them in 4 categories. The first category was general restaurant management, which we said guests per shift or per day, the guest check average, your sales divided by the total number of guests served, and RevPASH, or revenue per available seat hour, which is revenue over the number of seats you have times the number of hours you're open. Then we talked about front of house KPIs, drinks made per hour or per shift or per day from your bar, average drinks purchased by guest, both in raw numbers and dollar value, average server well ticket time, so how long it takes your bartender to make a drink for your servers. And we also talked about server guest check average, or server sales divided by the number of guests that server served. Then we talked about kitchen KPIs, food items sold per hour or shift or day, average food purchase per guest as both a number of items and a dollar value, and average food ticket time. And finally, we discussed back office KPIs, which we talked about employee turnover, discount comps and waste, cash flow, prime cost percentage, and your gross margin. So those are all the KPIs that we would track, and those are all the KPIs that I really do believe you should have a visual management system for. When we talk about visual management, it sounds complex. It sounds like it could be a whole bunch of things in the academic world. But really the way to think about visual management is you want to turn data into pictures. So for something like guests per shift per day, maybe that's a bar graph. Maybe that's a line graph so you can see it moving over days. Maybe we're going to look at guests per week when we compare weeks. But essentially, we want to turn data, which is numbers in a vacuum, into something that we can visually and quickly understand. The whole goal when we look at visual management is within 10 seconds of looking at whatever it is that you're putting together, you want to know where you are. And within 1 minute of looking at that information, you want to know where you need to go. So the easiest way to do this, like I said, graphs are the perfect vessel for visual management. But the easiest way to actually have this so that you can see it, your managers can see it, your staff can see it, because part of what we'll get into when we start talking about continuous improvement is how your staff relates to these numbers and how they help you determine how to make your numbers better. One of the best ways to do this is literally to have a board, a place where you are putting these graphs up, printing them off a computer, putting them physically on the wall. Now, you could do this digitally if you wanted to have a computer screen or something that showed it, but I think that's probably far beyond what most bars are going to do. We're much more likely to print out sheets of paper and tape them to the wall, which is fine. Actually, that works very well for a visual management system. Going back again to Toyota and how they've done their whole lean process and how lean works in manufacturing across the world at this point, the most common way lean uses visual management is through pieces of paper taped to the wall. So it's a great way to do it. And it's a way that, again, keeps those numbers, that data in front of the eyes of everyone that works for you. It makes sure that your servers know what the food ticket times have been. And make sure your servers know what the bartender's well time has been in making their drinks. And make sure people know how many drinks you're serving per day. And you say, well, the team doesn't really need to know that. They just need to do their job. That's not true. Because part of visual management is that by seeing the data, by putting the data in front of everyone, your team is more able to motivate themselves to improve the data. Essentially, think of it this way. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. When you put all these on the board, when you put all this data in front of your team, and they can see where there are problems, where there are issues, where they're not performing as well, what shifts are not performing as well, they will do what they can to make those numbers better. And so just showing it to them actually has the effect of increasing their productivity, actually has the effect of giving your customers better service, actually has the effect of making your bar run better. And that's before you do anything with it. That's just the act of showing those data points visually in the same way every day of the week, in a way that everyone that works for you has access to and can see that information. One thing I do want to clarify here. When we talk about some of our back office data points, our back office KPIs, employee turnover, cash flow, prime cost percentages, we probably don't want to show those to the team. But anything that directly affects them, the general restaurant KPIs, the front of house KPIs, and the back of house KPIs, we want them to be able to see those. Because that will affect how they do their job. That will affect their motivation as they go through that shift. The back office stuff we want to keep in the back office. Once you have this data posted where everyone can see it, as I mentioned, that in and of itself will be a motivator. That is probably actually worth, just by putting it on the wall, a couple points on your bottom line. Because it will make things better. It will make people work harder. But what you really have to do with it now is not just look at the data. You have to have a plan to do something important with that data. And that plan and what you do with that data is continuous improvement. To go back to Lean and Toyota, you might have heard this referred to as Kaizen or Kaizen. That is the Japanese term for continuous improvement that Lean uses most often. But, frankly, I don't think most people that work for us in the bar business really give a shit about Japanese. And I don't think they really care to learn. I've always thought that when you're dealing with normal people, you need to talk to them like a normal person. And that means not throwing in some Japanese crap just for shits and giggles. Rather than talk about Kaizen, I talk about continuous improvement. Because everybody understands that. Everyone knows what that is as soon as you say it. Now, here's the thing with continuous improvement. Our goal is to get 1% better every day. And you're not going to get 1% better on your bottom line every day. But you can probably find one process, one procedure, one thing in your bar that you can make 1% better every single day. And it's the idea that by making small changes, by solving small problems, by tweaking small items, over time that builds into huge changes. Over time that builds into huge impact for your customers, your team, and your bottom line. Because as we've talked about multiple times over the last few weeks in this podcast, we have a copacetic relationship here. Your team influences your customers pay the bills to your team, and then that's how you make money. So if you want to make money, we have to take care of the team first and the customers, because that is what puts money in your pocket. So how do we get from visual management to continuous improvement? So the first thing that we're going to look at is when we have visual management KPIs, when we have this data on the wall, obviously trends will become apparent to us. Patterns will become apparent to us. That's the beautiful thing about the visual management. But then you have to say, okay, why did Wednesday have a lower guest check average than Tuesday? Why did this Saturday perform worse than the prior 3 Saturdays? And I'm going to tell you something, and this is something that a lot of bar owners really don't like to hear. As the owner, you don't have a clue. You don't actually know. You might have been there. You might have been involved. You might have been on the floor all night long. You still don't know. Because you were not the one bringing in those drinks. You were not the one making those drinks. You were not the one taking things to the customers. So the real experts, when we start to look at how we can continuously improve, when we start to look at those KPIs and why the numbers are what they are and how we improve them, the real experts are your staff. So what we want to do is we want to use the visual aids of the data that we've collected to have conversations with our staff, preferably on a daily basis when we're doing shift meetings, on why that data is what it is. What is in their way? What makes it harder for them? What opportunities do we have as owners to make their life easier and to make it easier for them to hit those KPIs? Because when they make the KPIs better, we put more money in our pocket. But again, you are not the expert as the owner. You are not the expert as the manager. The expert is the bartender. The expert is the waitress. If we're talking about silverware and why silverware keeps getting thrown away, guess what? The expert is your dishwasher. It's not your head chef. It's not your line cook. No, it's your dishwasher, because that's the guy by the trash can where the silverware gets thrown away. You need to talk to the people at the source of the problem, period. And if you pretend for a second that those people do not know what's going on, if you pretend for a second that you know more than them about their job, this will not work. As a matter of fact, if you don't trust your staff, well, you need to get a different staff. But if you don't trust your staff because, not that they're untrustworthy and you've hired the wrong people, but if you don't trust them because you think that they never will know what you know, if you don't trust them because you think you know better than them what goes on day to day in your business, we have more problems to talk about. You have a mindset problem. And if you remember way back when we talked mindset is the key to everything. And the mindset you must have for continuous improvement to work is that your staff are the experts. Your team knows what they're doing. They are the people that have the expert knowledge that can allow you to make more money by making their lives better for them. What we want to do, first thing, when we have this visual information up on the wall, while we're in our pre-shift meeting, is to have a conversation with our staff about why the data is what it is, and to listen to them and to understand the opportunities that they feel that we have to make things better. The blockers that are in their way from performing as best as they can. The problems that they have that will allow them, if solved, to be more effective at their jobs. So once we have those problems, and in Lean and the Toyota visual management, literally a lot of this would be done with Post-it notes. So you have these charts up on the wall of where the data is, what's going on, and you can sit there during your pre-shift with a pad of Post-it notes, write out things your staff says about where these blockers are, where the opportunities are for improvement, rip off that Post-it note and slam it straight onto the graph that is that issue. Because what we're doing then during our pre-shifts is actually coming up with a list of problems that we can solve to make lives better for our staff and in turn to make us more money. You have to let your team guide you on how to make you more money. It sounds backwards for a lot of folks, but trust me, this does work. So once we have all these Post-it notes, essentially now we have a collection of problems. And the thing we need to do is figure out what is the root cause of these problems. If you say that the average server well ticket time is too long and servers have issues getting drinks from the bar, your initial reaction may be to say, well, I need a better bartender. My bartender cannot keep up. But is that actually true? Or is the problem that the server well is at one end of the bar and the speed rail and the ice bucket are at the other end of the bar? So your server has to walk to one, or your bartender, has to walk to one end of the bar, grab that ticket, walk clear to the other end of the bar, make that drink, walk all the way back, set it there, and they just walk back and forth. And in the meantime, because they're walking back and forth down the bar, everyone that's sitting at that rail is yelling at them and trying to get their attention. So we have to figure out not what we think the cause is, not what we expect cause of the problem we have identified, but we have to actually determine the real cause. To determine that real cause, we do what's called root cause analysis. We do an analysis of everything going on to determine the root cause of our problem. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, and I'm sure over time we will discuss more and more of them. But my favorite one is called the 5 whys. You ask why 5 times to try to get to the root cause of the issue. So again, if our issue was the server well ticket time is too long, let's say, why is the server well ticket time too long? Well, because the bartender isn't making the drink fast enough. Why isn't the bartender making the drink fast enough? Because the bartender has to walk back and forth from one end of the bar to the other. Why does the bartender have to walk back and forth from one end of the bar to the other constantly when making server drinks? Because the ice well is at one end of the bar. Now, if the only issue is that the ice well is at one end of the bar, but everything else they have is at the other, maybe we found our root cause. The root cause is the location of the ice well. We need another ice well down by where they're making drinks for servers. But maybe that's not it. So we call it the 5 whys because the idea is that you ask why 5 times to get to the root cause. But really it's infinite whys in that you're going to ask why as many times as it takes to get to your answer. A great non-industry example of this that is oftentimes used when people are doing lean training is what happened with the Jefferson Memorial. And I tell you this story just to kind of illustrate this again in a non-industry way that should help to solidify the concept of 5 whys in your head. So the issue that was faced with the Jefferson Memorial is that the Jefferson Memorial was deteriorating. Why was it deteriorating? Because it was getting power washed too often. Why was it getting power washed too often? Because there was a lot of bird poop on it. Why was there a lot of bird poop on it? Because there were a lot of spiders and the birds ate the spiders. Why were there a lot of spiders? Because there were a lot of flying insects attracted by the lights on the Jefferson Memorial. Well, why were the bugs attracted to the lights? Because the lights were on all night. So if you think about it, in this instance, the root cause of your problem initially appeared to be we're power washing the Jefferson Memorial too much. The actual cause was we have the lights on too much. So when the National Park Service did this, they determined, okay, we're just going to turn the lights off at night. We're not going to keep them on all night. We'll just run them for a few hours in the evening when people might be there. And then, middle of the night when nobody's up except, well, us, because we're in the bar business, they'd turn the lights off. It saved the Jefferson Memorial. And again, I point that out just to say sometimes the root cause is different than what it appears at first, and sometimes the solution, right? The solution to too much power washing was turn off the lights at night. Those don't seem closely linked. So it's very important when you're faced by a problem to actually go through this root cause analysis and to actually go through the 5 whys so that you can step all the way back and see what is this problem? What is actually causing me this issue? Because once you know the actual issue, oftentimes, very quickly, easily, and cheaply, you can figure out a solve for that root issue. You can figure out a way to mitigate the problems you're facing. Too often in the bar business, this is the kind of stuff that we never do. And this is really why most bars and restaurants make, 5-10% on their bottom line. And why the really amazing ones make 18, 20, 25%. Because those really amazing bars and restaurants, they are doing this sort of stuff. They are actually digging into their numbers. They're actually doing visual management, and they're actually figuring out what causes my problems. How do I solve them? Not how do I put a Band-Aid on this? Not how do I put lipstick on the pig? But how do I actually go to the root cause of my problem and solve it? So 5 whys is going to help you identify that root cause. But once you know the root cause, what are you going to do with that? Because obviously just knowing your problem does not equal continuous improvement. To have continuous improvement, you have to improve something with the knowledge of understanding your problem. So then we're going to use another lean concept called PDCA. Plan, do, check, act. And this is essentially a scientific way to test out and experiment new ideas and to see if those experiments yield changes in your KPIs. Because remember, all of this is based on your KPIs. If your KPIs don't change, there's no reason to change anything. But we need to come up with experiments and see if they do change our KPIs. We need to make data-driven decisions, and to make data-driven decisions, we have to see the data move. So with PDCA, again, we're going to plan, do, check, and act. So plan is essentially writing up an experiment plan. And in a lot of ways, you can think of PDCA a lot like high school chemistry. And I don't know how many of you remember high school chemistry fondly. Probably not many. I know I don't. I hated chemistry and experimentation. But we can actually learn a lot for that and apply it to running bars and how we make our businesses better. So when we were in high school, in chemistry, the first thing you would do is you would sit down with your little composition notebook or one of those blue notebooks, and you'd say, okay, I'm going to do this experiment, and this is my hypothesis. This is how I'm going to do it, and this is what I expect to be the outcome. Then you would run the experiment. You would take the data from that experiment. You would check it and make sure it works. You might rerun the experiment to try to duplicate your data. And then you knew you had a solid set of data that you could act upon. We're doing the same thing here. So plan, the first of our PDCA, is writing out that experiment plan. It's saying, this is what I intend to do. This is my hypothesis. If I do this, I expect this to happen. And when this happens, this is what I expect the result of that to be. So to return back to our server well ticket time example, you may say, I plan to put an ice bucket, a bus tub, because it's an experiment, so this is not a permanent thing. We're not going to buy a whole new ice well to sit at the other end of the bar. But I plan to take a bus tub, and I'm going to fill that full of ice. I'm going to put it where my bartender makes my server drinks. And that is your experiment. That is what you are testing. And you hypothesize, by putting the bus tub where the server drinks are made, that you will decrease your server well ticket times. So we're going to write this all out in a plan again. That's our first step. We plan it. After we plan it, we do. So PD, plan, do. Our do, in this case, we actually fill that bus tub full of ice. We actually put it down there. We run with it for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shifts. Whatever you think is the sufficient time to know that you have a statistically relevant data set, that you've done enough experimentation to know that this result will repeat itself over and over and over and over again. Now, I will tell you from experience, if the bartender has to walk 20 feet to get ice, and now doesn't have to walk 20 feet to get ice, your server well ticket times should come down, right? Everything else being equal, they will come down, period. So we planned to do it. We ran the experiment. The experiment showed that it did decrease our ticket times. Now, we need to check. And so when we check, we're going to do a few different things potentially. We can rerun that whole experiment. We can go back through the data and make sure that there's no other variables that we didn't account for. Maybe we said, well, it reduced our times, but we had a different bartender working those nights than we did on the nights where we saw the KPI led us to too long of a server well ticket time. So maybe we need to rerun that experiment with the initial bartender that had those KPIs that made us start this experimentation in the first place. But we need to check it. We need to make sure that we are absolutely solid in our belief that that bus tub full of ice actually decreased our server well ticket times. Now we're going to act. So in this case, act could be we're now going to just make it a standard that every day we put this bus tub down there. But if I know I have to have a bus tub full of ice at a specific spot in my bar every night, and I have space, I'm better off at this point going and actually buying a nice ice bit. It's going to be easier to use. It's going to retain temperature better. I can put a speed well in front of it. There's a lot of advantages there if you have the space to put that ice bin there. So that is our act portion. Act is what we do to solidify this into the standards that our business follows from here till forever. So again, our process is plan, write up an experiment plan, write a hypothesis, do an experiment, test out your hypothesis, and collect the data from that experiment. We're going to check the data we collected against prior KPIs. We're going to check our experiment for any variables that we did not account for that may give us a reason why the experiment succeeded or failed. And then we're going to act. And when we act, we're going to solidify this new process, this new procedure, this new standard, this new piece of equipment into what our bar does from now until forever. Now, I should mention here, if you get to check and your check does not work, right? If you go plan, do, check, and you really don't have anything to act on, don't just act to act. Go back to plan. When your experiment does not prove your hypothesis correct, or when your experiment proves a different hypothesis than you expected, when you check it out and that check does not meet your expectations, you need to go back to plan a new experiment, plan something else to do, and then do that new thing, check that new thing, see if it works this time, and if it does, now we act. But you never act until you have confirmed your hypothesis and you are sure when you check your data, when you check the outcome, that what you have actually will work in the long run. So to kind of summarize this all up, we covered a lot. The last couple of weeks, I feel like we've covered a lot. Lean management comes from manufacturing, but this continuous improvement idea and visual management work for all businesses and especially work for hospitality. When we talk about differentiating factors that separate the average from the amazing, this is one of them. This is something that few people do that really can set you apart and help you optimize your business through data-driven decision-making that will make your bar something way better than what it was, that will put way more money in your pocket at the end of the day. So I want you guys to keep this in mind, and I want you to experiment with this. and maybe something to try. Maybe rather than planning to do all of this at once, if we want to just experiment, dip our toe in the water with continuous improvement through visual management of KPIs, is pick a singular KPI. Look at guests per shift. Look at guests per day. Look at revenue per available seat hour. Look at average ticket time in your kitchen. Pick a singular KPI and roll with that first. Start with figuring out how you're going to measure that KPI. Then develop the visual management, that sign that you put up, that graph you put up in the bar that is visible to everyone. And then when you have your pre-shifts, talk about that one KPI, that one piece of visual management, and ask your staff, since they are the experts, how can we make this better? What opportunities do we have to improve this data point? And once they give you some ideas, root cause those ideas, figure out what is the actual problem here, not the surface problem. What is the actual underlying cause of this problem? And then run a PDCA cycle or multiple cycles if you need to plan, do, check, and act, and to run through iterative cycles and actually solve a problem. And I promise you, if you start with one KPI, while this seems like a huge task, while this seems like a large project, and it is in a lot of ways, you will end up in a place where you've solved a problem, you've increased your bottom line, you have improved your business. And once you see it work on one KPI, add another KPI. You don't have to do this all at once. You can do this in a step-by-step process. You can roll this out over time. But if you don't do this, if you don't focus on your KPIs, if you don't set up a system for continuous improvement, you will never be able to go from average to awesome. You will always work in your bar and not on your bar. Just think about that for a second. We talk a lot about working on your bar and not in your bar. This in and of itself, this whole concept is working on, not in. It's working on your bar. And it's giving you the tools, the time, the leverage to be able to really make something better for yourself, for your team, and for your bar as a whole. Now, a few items here before we head out for the week. Wanted to mention, if you have not had a chance, go check out our website, barbusinesspodcast.com. It is a great place to go. I just started a blog there, as well as on Medium. You'll find some posts there as well. There is more information above and beyond what is discussed in the podcast available on the website. Head over to Facebook, check out Bar Business Nation. We're working there to build a community of like-minded bar owners to really support each other and help each other and to discuss some of these cool ideas. And then the last thing I wanted to mention this week was I do have a book coming out. Right now, it's really exciting. We are in cover design and kind of formatting some of the final pieces of the book. So there will be a book coming out in the near future, How to Make Top Shelf Profits in the Bar Business. And that book should be out in the next couple months. So obviously I will push that more as we get closer to the book release date, but I am just super excited and want to let you guys know that that is forthcoming.
Thanks for listening to the Bar Business Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Check out our website at barbusinesspodcast.com and join our Bar Business Nation Facebook group for more strategies and tips.